History usually tells us about kings, battles, and great heroes. But what if I told you that some of the most boring, ordinary moments actually changed the world? These were moments no one noticed at the time, small, simple actions that shaped the destiny of all humanity. Today, we explore those silent turning points, where the boring became the most powerful. Phase 1, around 1,000 words. When we think about history, we imagine crowns, armies, castles, and great speeches. But the truth is that most of human history was made in small, quiet actions so ordinary that no one wrote about them. Actions that looked boring, but later turned into the foundation of civilization. Think about this. The first time a human planted a seed. There was no army watching, no crowd cheering, no music playing. Just one person, crouched on the ground, placing a small seed into the soil. That moment must have looked simple and unimportant. Yet, it was one of the greatest revolutions in human history. From that single act came farming. From farming came villages. From villages came cities, and from cities came nations. A boring, ordinary action, putting a seed into the dirt, reshaped the entire path of humanity. Or imagine the moment when someone decided to cook food over fire. Humans had known fire for thousands of years. They used it for warmth, for light, and to scare away predators. But one day, perhaps by accident, someone dropped a piece of raw meat into the flames. Instead of throwing it away, they tasted it. It was softer, tastier, easier to chew. This was not a loud discovery. No trumpets played. No historians were there to write it down. Yet this boring moment changed human evolution. Cooked food gave humans more energy, allowed them to travel longer distances, and even helped the brain grow larger. These small steps never make the headlines of history books, yet without them, nothing else would have followed. Another example, the first time someone tied a sharp stone to a stick. It sounds boring, doesn't it? Just a rock and a piece of wood. But this created the very first spear. With spears, humans could hunt larger animals, defend their families, and survive in dangerous lands. Again, no great king was present, no monument was built. It was just one simple, practical idea. But from that idea, human technology was born. Even language itself may have started in a boring way. Imagine early humans trying to share information. They did not have books, alphabets, or schools. They may have started with simple sounds, a grunt to warn of danger, a whistle to call the group, a gesture matched with a sound. Over time, these grew into patterns, and patterns became language. There was no great moment, no single day when language was invented. It was built slowly, through countless ordinary moments. But without those moments, there would be no history at all, because history only exists when we can tell it. And think about trade. The first time one human gave something to another in exchange for food or tools. Maybe it was just one piece of stone traded for a bit of dried meat. A boring deal, forgotten the next day. Yet that simple act created the idea of economy, of exchange, of value. From there came markets, coins, and the vast global trade networks that shape our world today. These are the boring seeds of history. Small, quiet, everyday actions that look meaningless when they happen. Yet over time, they grow into something massive. When we look at history only through kings and wars, we miss the truth. History was not only made by the powerful, it was also made by ordinary people doing ordinary things. And sometimes, those things mattered more than battles or crowns. In fact, if you think about it, every life, changing invention begins as a boring experiment. The wheel, for example, was not created during war. It was probably a simple carpenter or potter, rolling something heavy on a round log to make it easier to move. That small trick became one of the greatest tools of humanity. Even writing itself, the very thing that records history, started as boring marks on clay tablets. Farmers in Mesopotamia were trying to keep track of how many sheep they owned or how much grain they harvested. To them, it was just accounting, just simple lists. They never thought they were creating a system that would carry knowledge for thousands of years. But they were. So the real question is, are boring moments really boring? Or do we call them boring only because we don't see their power right away? History shows us that the biggest changes often begin in silence. A seed planted in the dirt. A spark on raw meat. A mark scratched on clay. None of them looked special at the time, but they built the human world. And if this is true, maybe our own small ordinary actions today are more powerful than we think. When we look back at history, we often imagine drama and action. We see images of swords, armies, and rulers. But the truth is that the slow, simple actions mattered just as much. Sometimes they mattered even more. Let's take water, for example. Drinking water is the most ordinary thing in the world. We do it every day without thinking. But the moment humans decided not just to drink water, but to carry it, that was a revolution. Imagine an early human scooping water into a folded leaf or an animal's skin. It seems so boring, doesn't it? Just water in a pouch. But this small act gave humans freedom. Now they didn't have to live right next to rivers or lakes. They could travel farther, cross dry lands, and survive in harsher places. That boring moment of carrying water shaped human migration. Now, think about clothing. At first, humans used animal skins only for warmth. But later, they began to stitch and shape them. A bone needle, a strip of sinew, and a piece of hide. Such a simple, boring action. Stitching clothes. But this allowed humans to survive ice ages, cross snowy mountains, and live in places colder than their bodies could handle. Clothing turned boring sewing into survival power. Even fire itself is more than one big discovery. After humans first learned to use fire, the boring work began. Keeping it alive, feeding it with wood, carrying embers wrapped in bark, sitting for hours to guard the flame so it would not die. To us, this sounds dull, like routine labor. But without that boring duty, fire would be lost. And with fire, humans gained warmth, safety, cooking, and light in the dark. A boring job gave us power over nature. Let's move forward to farming. Farming sounds peaceful, but in truth, it is full of boring details. Imagine bending over again and again to pull weeds, water plants, and check the soil. Imagine waiting weeks for crops to grow, watching the sky, fearing too much rain or too little. No battles, no crowns, just endless, ordinary work. Yet this boring life of farming created food security. People no longer had to wander endlessly. Villages grew, families stayed in one place, and civilizations rose, all because of repeated boring actions, planting, watering, harvesting. Another moment, the act of grinding grain into flour. At first, people chewed raw seeds, but someone began crushing them between two stones. Back and forth, stone over stone, until the seeds became powder. It must have been slow, tiring, and repetitive. Yet this boring grinding gave us bread, and bread gave us energy to build cities, raise armies, and write books. Without that boring grinding, no empire would have stood. Salt is another example. Today, we see salt as ordinary, even too common. But in the past, humans realized that salt could preserve food. Storing meat with salt was not exciting. It was boring, daily work. But it meant food could last through winters, journeys, and famines. This small, quiet habit gave humans the strength to survive in uncertain times. Let's also think about writing again, but from a different view. Imagine a person sitting at a table of clay tablets, every day, pressing small marks, recording numbers and goods. Day after day, the same dull routine. No one would think that these marks mattered much. But from these boring notes, a system of knowledge was born. People began to share ideas across generations. What was once dull record, keeping became the foundation of culture, religion, law, and science. History is not only shaped by big wars or leaders. It is also shaped by countless unnamed people doing boring tasks with patience. The first shepherd watching over animals. The first potter shaping clay again and again. The first healer testing wool ants, chewing leaves, and watching if they helped or harmed. None of these were dramatic. They were daily, silent, and repetitive. But without them, human life would not have survived. Now imagine travel. Walking is boring. Step after step, mile after mile, across empty plains. Yet, the slow, dull movement allowed humans to spread across the world. Africa, Asia, Europe, the Americas, all reached by endless footsteps. No one step was special, but together they reshaped the map of humanity. Even something as boring as sleeping in groups mattered. Early humans began to sleep near one another, close for warmth and safety. It must have looked like nothing, just bodies lying down on the dirt. Yet this boring routine created bonds. It built trust. It made families into tribes, and tribes into societies. The boring also shaped beliefs. Look at rituals. Early humans probably began with simple, repetitive actions. Placing stones in a circle, painting marks on a wall, arranging bones carefully. These acts may have looked dull to outsiders, but they became the beginnings of religion, culture, and meaning. Out of repetition came belief, and out of belief came identity.
History loves to highlight heroes, leaders, and events that echo through time, but below that surface there runs a river of small, unnoticed acts. These acts do not shine like battles or speeches. They are quiet, repetitive, and ordinary, yet they shape the flow of human destiny just as much, if not more. Take the act of sweeping. Imagine a person with a bundle of grass, brushing dust out of a hut. It feels trivial, even laughable compared to kings and warriors, but that sweep cleared away germs, waste, and pests. In tiny, boring motions, humans created healthier homes. Clean spaces meant fewer diseases, stronger families, and longer lives. Sweeping is boring, but sweeping is survival. Now let's step into the world of stone tools. At first, humans picked up sharp stones by chance. But soon they began shaping them, strike after strike, chip after chip, until the stone turned into a blade. This process was dull and slow, repeating the same strike again and again. Yet from this boring craft came spears, knives, and axes, tools that allowed humans to cut, hunt, and defend themselves. Civilizations were built not from one strike, but from thousands of boring, careful strikes. The same is true for pottery. At first glance, shaping clay on a wheel seems plain. You press, you spin, you smooth, hour after hour, pot after pot, but pottery transformed life. With pots, humans stored grain, carried water, and cooked food more efficiently. It was not war, it was not drama, but it was stability. And stability is what allowed societies to grow. Consider the act of teaching children. A mother showing her child how to tie a knot, a father teaching his son where to find roots, an elder repeating a story at the fire night after night, boring perhaps, to repeat the same things again and again. But that repetition preserved knowledge. It passed survival skills from one generation to the next, and that flow of boring lessons kept humanity alive through storms, droughts, and predators. Then there's walking with animals. When early humans began to follow wild herds, it was not glamorous. Step after step across endless plains, watching, waiting, trailing. But this dull patience taught humans how animals lived, how they moved, how they could be hunted, and later, how they could be tamed. Out of boring footsteps grew the partnership between humans and animals that changed the world. Dogs, cattle, horses, all came from long, boring patience. Even the first villages were shaped by boredom. Daily routines of fetching water, grinding grain, patching walls, and feeding animals made up most of life. It wasn't thrilling, but these repeated acts wove humans into communities. People depended on one another's boring tasks, and from that dependence came loyalty, friendship, and law. One of the most boring yet powerful acts in history is waiting. Hunters waiting by a waterhole, farmers waiting for the rain, sailors waiting for the wind. Waiting feels passive, almost useless, but in history, waiting often determined survival. Those who could endure the boring stillness of waiting often gained what others lost. We also cannot forget counting. Imagine someone scratching marks on a bone to track sheep. Every mark looks dull, every line the same. But from that boredom came numbers. Numbers gave us trade, architecture, astronomy, and science. Without those boring scratches, there would be no pyramids, no bridges, no rockets. Think about salt mining or iron smelting. Both began as repetitive, dirty, tiring work. Digging the earth, carrying heavy loads, tending fire pits. None of it was glamorous, but salt preserved life, and iron gave humans stronger tools and weapons. From endless boring labor came two pillars of survival. Even songs and rhythms grew from boredom. Early humans pounding grain or rowing boats probably began humming to pass the time. Repeated beats, simple chants, nothing special. But out of that dull repetition grew music, language patterns, and memory aids. Today, we call it culture. It began as boredom's companion. What about roads? The great highways of Rome did not appear overnight. They were laid stone, by hands repeating the same act. Lift a stone, place it, press it, repeat, thousands of times. The task was dull, but the result connected empires. Trade, armies, and ideas flowed because countless workers endured boredom. Even measuring time with shadows was boring. Watching the sun's shadow move slowly across the ground day after day. But this dull act gave rise to sundials, calendars, and the ability to plan harvests, journeys, and rituals. Boring observation became civilization's clock, and then there is time itself. Humans began to track time not with clocks, but with boring marks. Scratches on bones to count days, stones stacked to mark seasons. Watching the sky night after night, counting moons. It must have been slow, silent, and lonely. But this boring watching of the sky gave birth to calendars. And then there is storytelling. Not the dramatic kind, but the repeated retelling of myths, morals, and warnings. The same stories, spoken in the same way, generation after generation. To children, it may have felt boring to hear the same tale for the 10th time. Yet that very repetition carved memory into culture. It was boring, but it was glue for identity. If we look closely, history is made of these threads. Threads woven by hands that worked without glory, without recognition, in silence. The people grinding, sweeping, stitching, watching, waiting. They are the hidden builders of the human journey. When we celebrate great leaders, we must remember, leaders could not exist without the boring work of the people beneath them. A king's army marches only if farmers grew food. A temple rises only if stonecutters chipped blocks day after day. A book is written only if paper makers press pulp for weeks. Behind every shining moment in history are thousands of boring ones. So, what is the lesson? It is this: boring work is not wasted work. It is the foundation, the slow drip that carves stone, the small step that builds a path, the repeated act that, over time, shapes destiny. When we look at our own lives, maybe we can see this too. The boring routines we do, learning, working, practicing, saving, caring, they may not shine today, but they are the quiet roots of a future we cannot yet see. History is not only written in battles and crowns, it is written in boring hands, and those boring hands built the world. If we strip history down to its bones, we find that repetition, the very heart of boredom, is what shaped human life. Take agriculture. Planting seeds is not exciting. You press one seed into the soil, then another, then another. Thousands of times under the sun, day after day, watering, weeding, waiting. Nothing looks dramatic, yet this dull cycle transformed humanity forever. Food surplus gave rise to villages, then cities, then nations. Boring farming built civilization. Think of grinding grain. Early people used two heavy stones. They poured grain between them, then pushed, scraped, and ground until it turned into flour. The sound was harsh, the motion endless. Arms ached, backs bent. To watch it felt monotonous, but without that dull task, bread would not exist. And bread fed armies, builders, and generations of families. The dull grind fed the world. Consider fetching water. Every day, in villages across history, people carried jars from rivers and wells, step after step, balancing the heavy load. Morning, noon, evening, repeated for centuries. No battle was won that way. No crown was gained, but the very survival of entire families rested on that boring walk. And in those walks, humans learned rhythm, strength, patience, and community. Let us not forget stitching hides and cloth, one needle hole, then another. Pull the thread, knot it, repeat, hours of sitting, sewing by firelight. It felt uneventful. Yet from those stitches came warmth in winter, sails for ships, and banners for kingdoms. Every empire marched under flags sewn by anonymous bored hands, or think of tending fire for early humans. Fire was life, but it demanded constant attention, adding wood, blowing gently, keeping the embers alive. It was not exciting to sit and watch flames, yet if the fire went out, life grew cold and dark. So families took turns with this boring duty, and because of that duty, humans spread into colder lands and thrived. The same truth lies in writing itself. The first scribes pressed reeds into clay tablets. Over and over, they etched symbols that looked the same. Lists of grain, lists of taxes, lists of names. To them, it may have felt routine, even tedious. Yet those dull records are how we know history today. The boring scratches of scribes gave us memory beyond one lifetime. Now, let's imagine the shepherd. Day after day, he walks with his flock. The animals graze, the sun rises and falls, and nothing much happens. It seems slow, dull, uneventful, but this repetition created bonds between humans and animals. Eat birth, domestication. Sheep gave wool, goats gave milk, and later, trade flourished because a shepherd endured the boring march across hills. Even building shelters followed the same pattern. One branch placed, then another. One stone stacked, then another. Villages and towns rose from repeated gestures of lifting, carrying, and stacking. There was no single dramatic moment. The glory of cities grew from boring labor done millions of times. The act of learning language also came from boredom. Parents repeated the same words to children: water, food, fire, over and over until the sounds became memory. The repetition was tiresome, but from it, language blossomed. And with language came poetry, law, and philosophy. The seed was boring, but the fruit was extraordinary.